Would you like to know the main differences between an enterprise architect, a cloud architect, and a solutions architect, along with the main focus of the roles of the enterprise architect versus a cloud architect versus a solutions architect? If so, this video is going to be for you. Hi, this is Mike Gibbs. I'm an enterprise architect with approximately 25 years experience, and I've worked every architectural role you can imagine in the last 25 years. And I've also trained people that work at almost every major organization now as cloud architects, enterprise architects, security architects, solutions architects. And I want to help you understand the differences between the enterprise architect role, the cloud architect role, and the solutions architect role, so you can figure out which role is right for you. And then you can understand why you're going to need a difference in skills between each of these roles. And the secret to getting any job you want, the secret to getting promoted, and the secret to keeping your job long term is to be great at the skills and the focus of your job. So I'm going to help you understand these roles much better now. I'm going to start with the enterprise architect role, and I'm going to talk about the things that we actually do. And then I'll talk about for the cloud architect role and then the solutions architect role. But for the enterprise architect, it's going to be predominantly strategic. It's going to be the least technical of all the architect roles, and it's going to be very strategic. So we'll be doing things like developing enterprise architecture roadmaps. And what is that? That's really going to be a long-term strategy that's going to align the business's goals along with technology solutions to keep that business getting to their goals. And that's a lot of what we're going to be doing. Now, as enterprise architects, we do a lot of defining architectural principles and standards. So what does this mean? We typically establish guidelines to direct technology choices or the way technology may be deployed, for example. And by creating a standard or a way to do things or the way we want you to do things, we can protect that organization and keep that organization to its goals. So a lot of what we do is going to be that. Now, a lot of what we do is business alignment focused. The whole point of the enterprise architecture is to align the organization's people. It's find the optimal business processes and align the organization's technologies through a cohesive strategy for strategic advantage. So a lot of what we do with enterprise architects is engage with key stakeholders. That means the organization's executives, key business unit managers, and key people throughout the organization. So we will spend a lot of time with the organization's stakeholders, learning about the business challenges. We will be taking their input and putting that input into our architectural designs. We'll go back to the stakeholders. We'll get their feedback. We'll tune our designs, and ultimately we'll get the key stakeholders buy-in so that they will support the architecture when it's time for the engineering team to deploy it. Now, we do a tremendous amount of translating business requirements into technology solutions. So, for example, a high cost of downtime or a business that can't be down more than 5 minutes a year, well, that means they need a high availability solution. And that means we have certain things we need to design for in terms of resiliency and availability for that organization. So that's really what we're talking about. Now, we do a lot of technology assessment as enterprise architects, and one of the most fun things for me is evaluating future technologies and emerging technologies. See, the goal of enterprise architecture is to give the business a competitive advantage, and sometimes new technologies are like the coolest new tools for competitive advantage, and it still excites me to learn about these new tools. But sometimes the new tool doesn't make the business better at all or could potentially harm the business. So what we need to do is evaluate new technologies and say, will they provide our organization a competitive advantage? And if so, let's explore how we could use them best for our organization. And then if we find the best way to use it, then let's design a strategy to use it. But we also need to be able to say, nope, not for us. Now, I think half of what we do in all architect roles, cloud architecture roles, security architecture roles, solution architect roles, enterprise architecture roles is really performing what you call a gap analysis. But we do a lot more in enterprise architecture. So we are going to look at the organization from where they are now, and then we need to look at that organization and determine where they're going. And we're going to have to create a list of gaps and all the things they need to go from point A over here to point B. Lots of gap analysis. It could be in people. It could be in training for the people and knowledge skills for the people. It could be in technology choices, but it's constant here. Now, because the enterprise architect is isn't that strategic, the most strategic of the architects, we're going to be implementing architectural governance, for example. So we'll be defining processes for how things can be done. We will make sure that certain things are designed a certain way every single time. So we're going to place a lot of architectural governance there. We'll define potentially change control processes over here. Lots of governance structure we'll be creating, so lots of governance work. And we'll also be working to oversee industry compliance and make sure we're adhering to key industry regulations. It's not uncommon for me in an enterprise architecture role to work with attorneys to make sure we're regulatory and legally compliant, to deal with all their governance, regulatory compliance type folks that are out there as part of our environment. So we're going to be doing a lot of that as enterprise architects. Now, obviously, we'll be looking at application and infrastructure design and determining where we go from the current state to the future state, current architecture to be what we have. We also do a fair amount of maintaining enterprise architecture models. So we could be using, say, a TOGAF or a Zachman or some tool, and we typically maintain some type of adherence to one of these architecture frameworks. Now, as enterprise architects, we do a lot of technology optimization. We identify opportunities for consolidation. Maybe we can take these 10 applications and turn them into one, for example. Maybe we can take all this other stuff and turn it into one standard thing. Let's take these 40 different applications and turn them into 2. So we're looking for lots of opportunities for consolidation. You'd be surprised in an organization with 1,000 applications, they may have 50 applications that are doing the same thing, and they're not getting any of the benefits out of any of them because the data is scattered across 50 different applications, for example. Now, we're also going to look to drive standardization across the enterprise. What should your demilitarized zones look like? What should your base operating system look like? How are you going to maintain the configurations to make sure we don't have configuration drift, for example? So we're going to be looking to create ways to standardize that for the organization to remove human and manual error, so to speak. Now, a lot of what we do as enterprise architects, all architects, but a lot of communication and a lot of collaboration. So articulating our architecture choices to stakeholders, trying to convince the business why they need these technology solutions, taking these technology solutions that you hear from the executives, talking to the technology teams themselves and translating that, facilitating meetings, creating and leading architectural review boards and things. So constant communication. In fact, I think that's the thing that you do most as an architect is talk. And when you're not talking, you're writing for the most part. As enterprise architects, we often lead an architectural review board. Someone wants to make a change, and this review board will have lots of people that can look at the impact of the change, maybe a security person, a network person, an application person, a compute person, what have you, and many others to make sure that the change won't harm the system and that the changes are going to be good for the system long term. We get involved in a lot of risk management. And we're typically getting involved in risk management practices, for example, and looking for safeguards for the organization. We're typically going to be looking for ways to optimize those organizations' technology costs. And we're going to try to drive cost optimization when we can. And we're going to be looking to influence technology decisions, align technology systems with business needs. So as you can see, the enterprise architect is an executive. Now, this is an 80+% business executive job and a 20+% technology job. Now, let's look at the cloud architect and the main focus of their job. Now, we're referring to the traditional definition of a cloud architect. AWS has their own definition internally of a cloud architect. That's not the definition we're using. We're using the definition that all organizations would use. So the cloud architect is going to be the person that's responsible for the hybrid multi-cloud architecture that's going to be there. So that's going to be their role and all the systems that are on that. So it's going to be feeling a little enterprise architect-like, but a lot more technology-like, because now we've got someone that's more focused on technology. The cloud architect role is about 2/3 to 3/4 business. and about 1/3 to 1/4 technology, depending upon where you work. So this is still a relatively business executive role, and it has a business executive pay accordingly. So what are we dealing with here as the cloud strategy? So now we're dealing with developing cloud strategies and roadmaps. So now we're more about creating strategic plans on how to go to the cloud, which cloud to use, how many clouds to use, for example, which systems we use on the cloud. That's still pretty big. Now we're going to be doing a lot of evaluation of cloud service providers. And since 98% of enterprises are going to be multi-cloud, we're going to have to look at the private cloud options, for example, Nutanix or OpenStack, where we're going to typically get the greatest performance at the lowest cost for high throughput workloads. And then we're still going to want to connect to one or more public cloud providers. And that means we need to know the cloud, not just AWS or not just Azure. We need to know the cloud and know all the technologies to make it work in all clouds. And choose the right technologies. Now, as cloud architects, we're also going to have to define cloud architecture standards or guidelines. So, configuration management, for example, would be done this way. Or all demilitarized zones will be designed this way for web access. Or no proprietary systems will be used. Oh, there's whatever it is, we're going to be defining standards for the cloud architecture. Now, we will have to design scalable, secure, agile, and cost-effective architectures. And not only do we have to do all that, we have to make sure that these architectures drive business value some way. So the business isn't just spending money on cloud stuff and getting nothing for it. So we have to think about how do we do that, which then gets involved to some degree into people and processes, which is usually done by enterprise architecture. Now, we will also have to come up with some kind of application migration planning, data migration planning. We're planning the migration of things that we're going to be moving to the cloud. So we have to think about what goes into moving those workloads. What do we need in terms of compute? What do we need in terms of storage? What do we need in terms of network? What do we need in terms of security, for example? And in the modern world, it's all about hybrid and multi-cloud architectures, like I said. So determining which things to use. For example, don't use a DynamoDB, for example, if you're going to go multi-cloud and you need your database in multiple clouds. But you can use Apache Cassandra or MongoDB. Now, at the same time, don't use Azure Cosmos either. Again, it puts us into the same situation. Not that these cloud providers don't make a good product. They do. But we have to think about how it's going to work long-term over our hybrid multi-cloud environments. Now, as the cloud architect, there's going to be a lot of security, and of course, you're going to need to be working with some security architects. They're part of the architecture team you're leading, but you're going to have to help define cloud security policies. And a lot of these things are going to be security strategies that are straight on the cloud. They'll get a lot more work from a security architect than a cloud security architect here. But you're going to have to at least understand and look at the security posture of the organization, see what kind of vulnerabilities the organization has and what kind of risks it has, so that you as part of your architecture team can have the correct design, security architecture to design for your customer. You're going to have to ensure regulatory compliance with industry standards. So again, that may mean collaborating with the GRC people, collaborating with attorneys and others to make sure you're adhering to laws. Now, a lot of what we need to do as architects, they call it cost optimization, but really it's better planning. So if we know what we're doing, we know which workloads not to move to the cloud, which workloads to move to the cloud, and which workloads will be cheapest and where they'll be cheapest, in what form on the cloud. So that's architecture analyzing costs, and we need to plan these things and think about it ahead of time. As opposed to afterwards, after we spent too much money, FinOps coming in to say, oops, you spent a lot of money here, here's how you can spend less. The solution is to plan it properly. So we always need to look at the cloud cost versus the data center cost versus other costs and evaluate to see what's going to be right for our client. And that way we avoid waste. And we should be constantly looking for inefficiencies in the architectures and places where we can put things back. For example, if I've got a lot of high volume virtual machine workloads in the cloud, and we're talking about massive servers with like 256 cores in it and a couple of terabytes of DRAM, They may be 5 to 10 times cheaper to run them in the data center. Likewise, our event-driven architectures may be much cheaper in the cloud. So cost savings involves looking at holistically, figuring out where your workload should be, figuring out where your expenses are, and then optimizing it all. Now, as cloud architects, we're constantly designing for performance and reliability. We have to design for availability. We have to design for scalability. We have to design for performance level. So lots of work there. Now, in any architecture role, we get involved in some disaster recovery and business continuity planning, although more the cloud architect is more disaster recovery planning, less business continuity planning, but still more backup strategies as well. The difference is business continuity planning is what happens when we face a disaster and how do we keep the business up and operational. That might include, like, if you've got a hospital, where the nurse is getting in, how do you keep the nurses safe, how do you keep the patients safe, what systems need to run, what systems not. That's business continuity planning, where disaster recovery planning is much more about how do we get the systems online after a disaster and how fast can we get them online. And how often do we back up our data, for example? So that will be a huge part of the cloud architecture role. And of course, the cloud architect, like any other architecture, we're going to be leading review boards, especially for cloud architecture. So as you can see, the cloud architect is still a pretty heavy-duty business role. There is a technology focus on this role, but it's no more than a third of the role. Now, as we get to the solutions architect, it's still an executive role, but things start to change here. Now you're dealing with a 60% business executive, 40% tech. And a solutions architect is usually a pre-sales role where they design the solution for the client, they present it to the client, they help sell it to the client. But because it's a little more detailed, it'll be a little more technical. And that's why I said this could be up to 40% technical. So here we're going to be designing the solution architecture. So that's going to be a detailed architecture. And what I mean by this is, for example, at the enterprise architect level, let's say we had a 3-tiered website and that's what we're using. We wouldn't know what that would look like. We'd see a couple of load balancers in front of our web servers. We'd see a load balancer or two in front of our application servers, depending upon where we're hosting it. And then we typically see our database structure and what it would look like. And we might say Oracle, we might say relational database, and then we might say read replicas, caching, queuing, what have you. And we might just define that. Now, when it comes down to the solutions architecture level, now we're going to be talking about the AWS EC2 instance names and numbers, the actual AWS load balancers we would actually be using, for example. And that's the solutions architecture. So it's conceptual as we move in enterprise architecture and potentially cloud architecture, depending upon where we're working and where the cloud architect is working. But once we get into solutions architecture, we're actually talking about the exact product that we're typically using. And that's where it's going to dive deeper, because then it won't just be a virtual machine. It's going to be the exact virtual machine with the number of cores, the amount of DRAM, what have you. Now, still, the solutions architect translates business requirements into technology designs. But now we're dealing with more of a technology design, whereas the enterprise architect could be a business design or a technology design. So a lot more detail into the technology design. And more technical leadership here. So typically speaking, the architect here might be leading other architects or other engineers. For example, we might have a solutions architect that's working on a big bank, and they might need some security architects and some big data architects and some AI architects and even a DevOps engineer and data scientist to help that architect design the solution. That's going to be completely there, but these are predominantly technical teams that we're dealing with here, as opposed to the enterprise architects that could have been, say, executive teams that they're also working with as well. Now, definitely as a cloud architect, we're looking to resolve any kind of architectural issues. Part of our architecture teams will help us look for technical debt, for example, we can get rid of, gotchas, that kind of thing. So we're going to be doing a lot of it. Now, as a solutions architect, we still need to collaborate with stakeholders, but it's less than the other architect roles. Because if we're going to design, present, and sell a solution for the client, we need to find out from the client, what do they need? And a lot of that's going to come from our stakeholders. So still lots of here. Now, the solutions architect is going to be giving a lot of presentations about their architectures, pre-sales type presentations, what have you. Now, the solutions architect may get fairly deep into some project planning and some estimates of costs, plans, timelines, potentially bills of materials, what have you. And, that's a lot of what they're going to be doing. But the solutions architect will still look to mitigate any kind of technical risk. And they'll try to embed security into any solutions, and they'll try to help maintain adherence to any of the enterprise's standards that are set forth by the other teams. Of course, the solutions architects are going to be looking deep into technology, so they're going to have to make sure those technology choices meet, say, regulatory requirements like GDPR or HIPAA. And the solutions architect may lead a proof of concept with some engineers they bring in from their company, and they're going to be designing for scalability and performance as well. And that's typically your solutions architect. So you can see, if you look deeply, the enterprise architect is the most strategic. It's often the highest pay as well. Not always, but often. And it's more of an executive role. That cloud architect is kind of a cross between an enterprise architect and a solutions architect, in that there's still a lot of executive things the cloud architect are doing, but there's still some of the technology. And once we will move into that solutions architect role, you can typically think pre-sales, but much more product knowledge of a single solution provider. But in none of these cases are we touching the technology, building it, implicating it, or implementing it. It's still a design, present, and sell. Now, if you'd like to become a solutions architect, a cloud architect, an enterprise architect, an AI architect, or a security architect, why don't you join me in a free webinar? We run these webinars once a week. And on these architecture webinars, we'll talk about what we do as architects. We'll talk about the skills you need for the architecture career of your desire. And we'll talk about how to get hired. And of course, it'll be live and free on Zoom. So we can have a full conversation, discuss the roles if you'd like. I can assess if you like, and it's all free. So the link to sign up for those free webinars is in the description of this video. Please sign up, and I look forward to meeting you there. I also have a tremendous number of free resources in the description of that video to really help you in your architecture career. And it could be things like winning the interview to become a cloud architect, or the skills you need to be a cloud architect. There's just so many things that are there, and they're all free. So please go check them out and maybe sign up for some, and they'll be emailed to you. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell to be notified of new videos to assist you in your architecture career, whether that be an enterprise architecture career, a cloud architect career, a security architect career, an AI architect career, solutions architect career, or any other architecture career. This is Mike Gibbs signing off for now, and I hope to see you soon.